Hello, I'm Robert, fact checker and science blogger. I'm doing this to help people in our Facebook group Doomsday Debunked, and do come and join us either if you're scared or to help the scared people or to help with the debunking. Be sure to read the rules at the heads of the group if you do join. So anyway, I'm going to talk this time about the cases in Singapore. I'm going to talk a little bit about that to start with, because it's to do with the question, what's going on here? It's obvious there's been an epidemic in China. You can see from all those cases there, and but is it spreading anywhere else outside China? And you might think it's obvious. I mean, like, look, there's a big splodge in Italy, 79 cases, and if you zoom in here, you see a big splodge there in South Korea, 556 cases. But if you look at it a little bit differently, then of course big splodge there, the Diamond Princess, and that's just a cruise ship off Japan. But if you look at it a little bit differently, then the WHO don't count that as being an epidemic yet in any of those places. The reason is because they can still be traced back to China, most of them. Now, the South Korea, the one, they're not quite sure how that got there. So that's when they start getting a little bit concerned. But the Diamond Princess, that came from China, and the Singapore ones, I'm going to look at Singapore now. So, but the ones that, first of all, ones they're only concerned about, they're mainly concerned about Iran and then Africa, which doesn't even have any yet. So I'll talk about why they're concerned about those two, and a bit about the South Korea one. So the question is, if it's a cluster, you have these people who are called superspreaders, who just by accident of where they happen to be, their personal habits, because they know lots of people, because they're very friendly, outgoing people, and have lots of close contacts, and maybe something with their physiology, then they are called superspreaders, and they may infect loads and loads of people. In the South Korea, these 500 people, it's a church where they have a lot of these sort of hug and sing together in the church, and this may be how they managed to it got spread so quickly amongst them, and they don't know yet who started it. But that is very localised to that church, you see, and that's very localised to Diamond Princess, which seems to have been not a very good place for keeping passengers. They haven't managed to keep the passengers from infecting each other, and so they had difficulty managing to really quarantine them very well. And but these are totally enclosed cases. They know where they all came from, and they can trace up everyone that they could have passed it on to. And China's been doing that in a huge way. It has followed up more than 500,000 people as contacts. So if you've got an advanced economy, an advanced healthcare system, you can do that. You can just follow up all the contacts of one of these clusters. As long as it's a cluster, then the WHO, they don't think of that as being a pandemic yet. This is just a cluster that is still linked back to there. So then there's a big question though, could there be sort of secret, hidden people who just got flu and don't even know, or think they've got the flu or the cold, and they've actually got COVID-19 and they've never been tested, because it's just spreading around, and these people have got no connection with China, they're just spreading from person to person. So that's the concern that some people have. So I'm going to answer that and say why it is that WHO at present don't think this is happening to a great extent. There definitely will be some cases they haven't found yet, but they don't think there are very many. Now, the reason they think that, it's really to do with Singapore. Singapore is a very, very special case. It gives us data, and there's also similar data from Hong Kong, and similar data from China, but especially from Singapore. It gives us very good data on this. And so that's what I want to talk about first. So here are all the cases from Singapore, and it goes all the way back to 23rd of January. And here we are. These are the very first cases. It was due to one of these tour groups, and people who got those are the three main cases that started all off in Singapore. And so Singapore has quite an old history for this virus, going back to 23rd of January. Now, the great thing about Singapore is that everyone in Singapore who gets a flu, who gets a bit of a fever, who gets a cough, and they go to their local general practitioner, obviously people who obviously go in to get treated, and anyone who goes in for treatment anywhere in Singapore, in any of these health centres, then they get a sample taken, which is then sent off for testing, and they test that for a wide number of respiratory viruses, so such as the flu and cold viruses. So since the 23rd of January, they have just added COVID-19 to these tests they do already. Singapore has a very advanced, very high economy, high GDP. It's like it's up with Japan, South Korea, and these places. So they can afford to do that. So we have very good evidence from Singapore, because out of 400 cases of people who went in with, so they've had 85 cases that they've linked back to this chain of infections that they can link back to China, to Wuhan. And then they have 400 cases in total that they did just automatically through these automatic tests, and they all came up negative. This means that there can't be much symptomless spreading going on in Singapore. And that's quite a lot of people, 85. And out of 85 people, they didn't manage to have any significant amount of symptomless spreading. Because if they did, then we've had plenty of time since 23rd of January they would have gone all the way through their cycle. They would certainly have infected other people if this was going on, and then some of those would have had serious cases, and then they would have gone into gone into hospital and say, I'm feeling really bad, can you help me? And then they'd have done this automatic test, and they would have detected COVID-19, and they didn't. So this, I think, is excellent evidence that the iceberg can't be very big. They talk about the tip of the iceberg. Now, this is not my reasoning. This is WHO spokesman, Mike Ryan, the WHO spokesman. He was 14-30 minutes. You can go and listen to him into this press conference, and he talks about this. Maybe we could just bring it up. But where was it? 14:30 in, and if I click play.
Director of Health Emergency Information
and 14:30
here at WHO. As always, we will have a...
That's the question. Go play it. He's asking the question. You don't need that.
And in the Special Administrative Region in Hong Kong, where in emergency rooms and as part of normal winter respiratory disease surveillance, they've been actively testing thousands of samples that are not suspect cases of COVID and of COVID. And at the moment, we're just not seeing COVID activity amongst those samples. So that would give an indication that the iceberg may not be that great. That's not a guarantee. But this idea that this iceberg is absolutely massive and in some way we're only detecting 1 or 2 or 5%, this is all based on modelling. This is based on certain assumptions around what's happening. And that those assumptions and those speculations are as valid as speculations in the other direction. But I sometimes find difficult to understand is why the assumption to the awful is the one that's accepted, and while the assumption of what might be a higher proportional detection of cases is always seen as invalid. I think we have work to do to see just how big that iceberg is. But if we look at the cases outside China, If we take away that issue, we've had well over 400 cases outside China. We've had 4 to 5 weeks now of cases being outside China. Only 22% of all the cases outside China are involved with a local transmission in a second or onto a third country. 78% of cases still have a direct link to Wuhan or to China. And of all of those cases, and we've been tracking each and every one of them, we can only find 8 cases that are not linked in some way to one of the identified transmission chains. Now that doesn't mean that there aren't other chains out there, but that's what we're seeing. And all of the other data being collected from other surveillance systems isn't suggesting that there's widespread, efficient community transmission going on, either outside Wuhan or outside China. But without a serology test, that is very difficult to say with absolute certainty.
So that's what he says. So a serology test means that when you can test the blood of people for the antibodies, and so they haven't got one yet. Once they've got one, then even people who have been all the way through, so without a serology test, that someone could have the virus, pass it on to someone else, get over it, and then you test them for the virus and they haven't got the virus anymore. But if you have a serology test, then you would be able to find the antibodies, and so you'd be able to test everyone, and you can find out exactly what's going on, because you can find people who had the virus and haven't got it anymore. So that's why he's saying that until we've got a serology test, which we don't have yet, then we can't do a very thorough investigation of this. But there's evidence from Singapore, where they test everyone, and then also in Hong Kong and in China, where they're testing thousands and thousands of cases that have not got any connection with Wuhan, and just as part of routine testing. And they're just not finding these cases that you should have if there was a big iceberg. So they don't think the iceberg is very big. So that's the main point there. However, we do have now, that since that interview, we do have these South Korean cases where this church with 500 or so people already got it. There's about 1,000. It could easily go up to 1,000 people, and they don't know where they came from originally. They haven't yet found the original seed. It's quite difficult. It's a church where so this super spreading event is when you have people who, for some reason or other, they have a lot of close contact, or something about the physiology or something about the circumstances leads to a lot of spreading. So you've got a diamond princess, and here you have a church group where there was a lot of kind of hugging and singing together, and this seems to have maybe was a factor in how they spread so quickly. So that leads to a very big cluster when you do that. But if they're all connected, then you can still pull up all the cases of everyone who is connected with that cluster. And so you still don't have that iceberg, which is when you start having problems. That is still all above the water. It's all visible. There may be one or two little ones that you don't see, but so long as there are not very many of them, and they don't infect many, and they infect hardly any, and then they don't infect anybody, then it's just going to peter out around the edge of your cluster. And it's telling everyone to take precautions and so on, and then you contain the cluster, and and everyone's being careful, then you can contain it. You can contain a cluster. And so they're not worried about the cluster. Of course they are for the personal reason of the people being infected, and some of them, small percentage dying, especially the older ones. But in terms of this question of is it a pandemic, then that's not their centre of attention. Their centre of attention is on this dot here in Iran at the moment. And that South Korean one, because they want to know where it comes from. But with Iran, it's much more, it's rather more challenging, because they have these 28 cases in several different cities, and they all seem to have come from this particular, or they seem to have originated in this particular city, a rather beautiful city, an ancient city in Iran called Qom, or something like that. I don't know how you pronounce it. See, a rather beautiful place. that's the place where which is the source of this outbreak in Iran. But it's a whole city, and they don't know. They haven't yet traced back to find the origin of this event. Now, what makes it? Several things suggest that there's quite a big iceberg there that hasn't been discovered yet, but not huge, because just from the rest of the world it doesn't seem too likely that it's got huge there yet. But it's they've got 5 deaths, and that would would expect to have 100, 200 people, so maybe more, who are confirmed if you've got that many deaths. And so, and because only a small percentage die, and they're old people as well. They were the first 2 are certainly were, I think they were in the 80s, and to have a couple in the 80s that have died, it would suggest there's probably quite a few others they haven't found yet. And another thing that adds to it is that there's a case in Lebanon, and there's also a case that was caught in the airport, and there's a case here in British Columbia. One of those 6 cases is a woman, was the 30s I think, who had visited Baghdad, visited Iran, I don't know where in Iran, in January. And she had no connection with China. And if this was how she got infected, that would suggest that Iran has had it there for several weeks without detecting it. So, and it's a little bit surprising because Iran has pretty good healthcare. It's actually, there's a $1.8 billion, I think, tourist in that 2017, 2018, of medical tourism, of people going to Iran because it has very high-tech medicine, and the living expenses and the medical expenses are very low. And people, tourists go from India, Pakistan, and from parts of Europe to Iran in order to get medical treatment because they have such great medical care there. And they've been pretty good at containing epidemics in the past. MERS, they contained them. They have only one polio case. They've pretty much eliminated malaria, and indigenous malaria. They still get malaria, but it's mainly from people coming into Iran. They pretty much eliminated it in Iran itself. People tend to think, I think it's partly just propaganda. The US and others sort of try to downplay what Iran is like, but it's a pretty high-tech civilization there. It's got its area, absolutely huge area, the size of a large part of Western Europe, and a large population, and it's, because of all the sanctions, then it's learned to be very self-sufficient, and it's very high-tech as well. It makes just about everything it needs. So I don't think they're certainly, with the test kits that they've sent them, then Iran can certainly do the testing for the virus, and they'll be offering them as technical support from Cairo. They've got an office in Cairo that's offering technical support to Iran. And so obviously that's quite a priority for the WHO to sort that one out. And then the other top priority, and that's where Dr. Tedros is at the moment, he is in Africa, and this is their top priority. And you might think, why bother about Africa? Because there aren't even any cases there yet. But remember that there was cases in Iran since January that weren't detected. Are there any cases anywhere in Africa that haven't been detected yet? And so just about all the African countries, and especially the ones that have close connection with China, they now have testing kits, and they're testing everyone and who comes in, who's got connection with China. And but the WHO, they want to put a very big program into supporting and making stronger the health systems in Africa. And I find it really, really strange. It's not even on our news. I haven't seen it on the BBC News yet. It probably has been, I've missed it, but the WHO are calling for a $675 million program, which would be mainly used to build in resilience in places like Africa. so they can first of all detect it, and then be able to contain the first patient, the first 100, and the first 1,000. And they want every country in Africa to be able to do that. And talking about places there where it's very difficult. They've sent out protective suits and so on. They've got free online training for the medical workers, an online course they can go through on Open WHO to help them learn how to treat these people. And they're doing the best they can to prepare and trying to identify hospitals and other places where they would be able to contain and quarantine these people. So even though there's nobody there, WHO, with their vast experience of epidemics, that is where they're looking. And they're saying, we've got to get these people prepared. We've got to get them ready. We can't be complacent with all these places in other countries. And there's definitely a chance it's going to spread. If it spreads somewhere like the Congo, or to Somalia, or somewhere, Nigeria or somewhere, but if it spreads to somewhere like Somalia or Sudan or something with a comparatively weak healthcare system, then we could get something like that. Similar numbers, thousands of people, 100,000 people in Africa who are confirmed, and then, it would probably be more than 2%. They wouldn't be able to put 2,000 people on ventilators like they can do in China. Or they couldn't without massive funding to help them. Some countries say the Congo ended up having 100,000 cases and then 2,000 people, 4,000 people needing critical care and ventilators and oxygen. What's going to happen? So that is why and then that then becomes a source all the way through Africa, because they've got very porous borders, and then back to the rest of the world again. It is absolutely, I think it's very important that we keep it out of Africa. And so this is where I just don't get it. So I'm sharing this partly in hope that maybe, it is possible that it's just not going to go to Africa for some reason. Or it does get in there, and we just get 1 or 2 cases, and then rush in and we manage to stop it. And that is the hope. But if it goes beyond that, then we could certainly be seeing, within a pandemic situation for sure, because in 2 different continents, and then you're trying to contain it in a particular African country, and then to the whole of Africa, and you're trying not to get cases coming out from there to other countries, and then rushing to try and get this vaccine finished. And that's why people are rushing this vaccine as fast as possible. They're concerned about something like that happening. And then if that does happen, the only way to contain it after that, once it starts spreading like that, would be with a vaccine. So it'd be a very top priority to get your vaccine finished and worked. And that's quite difficult to do and very expensive. It costs far more to make the vaccine than it would cost to stop Africa from being infected in the first place, as well as saving thousands of lives. And then look at the effect on, they reckon $185 billion that the Chinese economy has lost in the first quarter of this year. And yet, the 49 top economies in the world have yet only found $1.2 million to give to the WHO for this emergency fund. And they say they need $60 million immediately. And they said that several weeks ago, and they still haven't got it. They've only got 1.2 million. There's something very strange going on here. We should be raising, so I'm raising it, you try raising it with whoever, if you've got some clout of any any political clout, then do try to raise this and spread this. We need to fund this. It's far too soon. The WHO say the window of opportunity is still there. If we get this, and this emergency fund will help stop it. And that's our priority right now. This very moment. This is what it should be in all our news. That this is the very top priority. Our news readers on the BBC should have this as the first item in every news bulletin about the COVID-19 that and have a status as to how far they've got with this fund, and say they've reached 1.2 million, they've reached 1.3 million, they've reached 1.4 million, and then people would be hopefully would get a bit embarrassed and say, we need 60 million and we've only managed to raise another 100,000 since yesterday. And then maybe that would embarrass people a bit, and then maybe they would start talking about it in the governments and do something about it. It's in their own self-interest to do this. Because spend 60 million now, save billions of dollars later. It doesn't make any sense at all. And so they have had these pledges. So far, we've had $26 million pledged, but without any timeline, although they said it's urgent. And of those 26 million, they say they've only had 1.2 million that they've actually received. And in order to strengthen the response in the countries with weaker healthcare systems. And so we're all in this together. It's not a case of, look, there they are in Africa, but the people in the UK count, and they're very important. The UK's government is doing everything to help the people in the UK, and then Africa can deal after its own. It's not like that. If we want to protect the people in the UK, we should protect the people in Africa. We have to do it. It's our priority for the sake of our own people. So now, hopefully something will happen. Hopefully at some point some people either we're lucky, or else people do start doing something about this. And but now let's talk about what the worst case is. So the worst case is that it starts spreading on the community level, and that may have already happened in Iran. And for all we know, it might have already happened in Sudan or the Congo or something, and they just haven't detected it yet. And let's hope that hasn't happened. And but if that did happen, then what would happen next after that is that whatever country it was, let's say it's Iran, and that's rather more optimistic than Africa, but then in Iran, then they would move to the next stage. And the WHO are not talking about the next stage yet, because they will have to make all sorts of plans, and they would then share the details, and they don't want to give all these details when we're still at the point where the important thing is containment. They just want to keep on one thing at a time. Right now we've got to focus on containment. This is what we've got to do, just contain it. Then if they decide that it's gone too far, then we go to the next stage. So the next stage is where it becomes like the flu pandemics that we've had in the past. And it's like the colds. So at this next stage, then it's no longer a cluster. It's no longer all tied back to a single person. It just spread too far. There are too many, you find someone there, you just can't trace them back to anyone else. Not without these serology tests. There's literally no way to do it. So if you find someone here that was actually infected because they met someone there, who then was infected because they met someone there, who then was infected because they met someone there, say, and in a little chain of infection, that could have happened in a week or two, with it, 2 days, because some people get symptoms within a couple of days and would be already be spreading it and just think they've got a cold. So if you have a little chain like that, without a serology test, there's literally no way to find out how it got there, because these people are now over their symptoms and there's no virus left in them, just antibodies, and we don't know what the antibodies look like yet. We can't test for them. So once you're in a situation like that, you just can't deal with it anymore by just following up contacts. Then the other thing that makes it difficult is like once you've got a large number, we've got to say 100,000 people that have got it, then you can't quarantine them all, because China is doing tremendous efforts. It's got these tens of thousands of confirmed cases, and it's building entire 76,000 in mainland China, all having to be quarantined in these huge hospitals. They're building not just one hospital, but many hospitals, each with 1,000 patients. And China has the economy to do that. And I mean, Iran could do some as well. I don't know what their basis is, but if you look at somewhere like the Congo, there's no way the Congo is going to build 10 hospitals, each with 1,000 patients, in order to deal with the virus outbreak. So there's a point at which, and for China it's quite large, tens of thousands, at which you haven't yet overwhelmed your hospital system. In the case of China, because they built lots of new hospitals. In the case of Africa, they'd have trouble maybe with 100 cases. Remember, it's not just simple isolation. They've got to be isolated. It's not just a case of finding a ward for them, a ward where they can be isolated from other patients. And that's not going to be easy if you're in a country like Sudan, say. So there comes a point where you've got too many cases in your country, and that's why they want the strengthening resilience in Africa to postpone this as long as possible. So the point at which you can't contain it anymore. So there comes a point which you've got either you've got too many cases, so it is a cluster, but the cluster is just too big, and you just can't hospitalise everyone, or else because you've got lots of people around the country. So right then, that becomes very much like a situation in the Diamond Princess. So then was then a situation we had 3,000 people. So we've got the Diamond Princess somewhere here. Where is it? Is it down there somewhere? Let's see if I can find the Diamond Princess. It would be in the 600s, wouldn't it? Country region. I'll look on this page instead. I've got some other things I want to talk to you about here. Anyway, I'm trying to find the numbers for Diamond Princess. See if it's on there. No, maybe I'll have to leave this too. I was expecting it to be on that page somewhere, or there. Diamond Princess. I find it a little bit difficult to navigate sometimes. Anyway, there's roughly 600 odd cases. Let's see if I can bring it up. Diamond Princess deaths.
Global fears are rising over the coronavirus.
I should have looked up these numbers before. Sorry. Anyway, there's. I know I can pause it. Of course, I can do that. Okay, I found it now. So here we are. This latest situation report. I should have thought of looking there. So the Diamond Princess, 634 cases and 2 deaths, and out of 3,000 people. And of course there may be more deaths still, but that gives you an idea of what you would expect if you had like a community level spreading at a very high level, so that lots of people have it in the community, and yet people are taking care, like they did on the Diamond Princess. They're kind of staying at home, not going. If you're living in one of these, say you were living in Iran and in a city where you knew there were lots of cases and rather similar level to Diamond Princess, or like Wuhan, then out of maybe 3,000, then maybe 2 would die. Now actually, it would probably be much less than that. If you look at if you took really strict measures like they did in Wuhan, then in Wuhan it's only 4 cases that people have died out of every 100,000. So even though these thousands who've died in Wuhan, then remember that there's millions of people. I think it's 50, in Hubei province it's 58 million or something like that. 50 odd million people. So it's only 4 in 100,000. I did the calculation the other day. And the WHO sent that figure and I checked it, just to double checked it. And that's what the situation is. So if the whole world became like Wuhan province, and you talk about 4 people out of 100,000 dying, and those 4 would, most of them, be people of the old elderly people, a lot of them over the 80, and you'd be able to very much reduce your risk of being one of those people by washing your hands many times a day, especially after touching something, some public surface, before you touch your face, and keeping a good distance from people who cough and sneeze. And so that is the worst case. It is not everyone dying. The people who say that everyone's going to die of this is not possible at all. It would be a case where it goes around the population and a certain percentage would get it. And if we took good precautions like they did in Wuhan, I mean, especially people didn't tend to go out very much at all because of this until it's over, as some people would, and you're home working and so on. And this would reduce the number of deaths a lot. And so that is like a worst case future that we could be headed for until they get the vaccine, which so a kind of year of people not mixing so much and avoiding public gatherings and working from home and a lot of teleconferencing and or whatever it is. I'm not preempting what the WHO would advise, and we will see when we get to that if that situation happens. But that's the worst case. And so I thought something like that. And it would start off as being some particular country, like in Iran, and just like we have screening everyone who's coming from China, would then be screening everyone who's coming from Iran, would then start screening everyone who comes from Sudan, and then everyone who comes from the Congo, and everyone who comes from Nigeria, everyone who comes from the Chad, everyone who comes from the entire African continent. And so the countries that haven't been affected would be dealing with it with screening as far as possible, until eventually it gets to the point where they've got too many cases to deal with that way. And then they would be doing the same as they'd be doing in those other continents. So that is the worst case. But I just don't get it. Why aren't these people rushing aid to Africa to help them to stop it by the WHO, who know what they're doing? That's what we should be doing. It just doesn't make any sense. And maybe what will happen if we don't do this, and then if the worst case happens, we do get a pandemic and a situation like that, then maybe we'll get something that happened with the famines in the 1980s. In the 1980s, I think it was, where there were these quite large-scale events. Then there was a lot of public. It was too late for the actual famines themselves. People only acted until after the famine. But we have now got this $1 billion a year fund called the CERF, and this fund is used to prevent famines. And the money is if the crops are failing in some country, and they project a famine, and instead of like it used to be in the 1980s, that they would have the crops and everybody knew, all the experts knew that a famine was coming, but they just couldn't get any donations for the public, because you can't get. It's very difficult to run an advertising campaign and or have an event of singing and so on in order to get donations when nothing is actually happening yet. All you've got are predictions. But then once you get these children dying of famine and all the pictures on television, then you get the money pouring in. So that's why we kept getting these big famines, and then lots of donations, and then if people then decided this is not working, this is not a good model to do, and so eventually this got the political impetus underway to fund that started off with some tens of millions, then hundreds of millions, and now it's $1 billion a year. That various countries worldwide put $1 billion a year into preventing famines, and so we now don't get these famines. And that's much better than the donations effect, because we stop them before they happen. And we need something like that for epidemics. $1 billion a year fund. If we can do it for famines, we can do it for epidemics. And then the money would just be there, and the WHO wouldn't have to be holding out their hat and say, please give us some money so that we can go out and prevent this epidemic, prevent this pandemic. They would just go and say, we have a case here, we need the funds, and the funds would just be there. So hopefully, if the funds don't come now, then hopefully we can get some impetus from this, and doing the analysis afterwards, where people next year will be looking back and saying, look, if only they had paid that $675 million now, and by now I mean right now, if only they paid that $675 million today, then this future pandemic wouldn't have happened. And then maybe that'd be a wake-up call next year. But the good thing would be if it can be a wake-up call this year, before it happens. But it's very difficult to get their minds engaged in a hypothetical. And the thing is, the WHO, the experts, they understand, but it's very like the famines. It's very like the situation with the famines in the 1980s, when the experts were just saying, we're going to have a famine, we're going to have a famine, can we have donations to help stop this famine? And nobody was giving them anything. And then the children start dying, and then you get the funds coming in. And it's just the way people tend to be. They're not very imaginative in a way. And, a lot of people, including politicians, they're very focused on their present-day concerns, and they know that there are these people in the Diamond Princess who need to be evacuated. They want to evacuate them, even if it doesn't even make a lot of actual practical sense, but if it makes kind of political sense. And it's kind of poetry instead of science. And we get so much of that. And it's got its place. I'm not saying it's wrong, but we also need the science. We need evidence-based science. It has its place, and it's very important. And this is a situation where evidence-based science matters. And I'm brought up as a scientist, a mathematician, and in a long-term interest in science, and involved in science, and been following all the twists and turns of pretty much all the scientific discoveries since the 1960s, of the main ones. And don't mean I've been following everything. Some part of it I've been learning about after the event, but looking at this is if only people could see this now, rather than have to see it a year from now. But if we're lucky, it doesn't happen. It hasn't happened yet, and people are working quite vigorously. But I very much respect the WHO's expertise. They're the scientists. They understand these things, and these experts tell us that we should be bolstering resilience in Africa, and so we should be doing that. And if we just manage to sneak through and don't do that, like the 1% chance or the 5% chance or the 20% chance, whatever it is, that nothing happens in Africa, then we've been lucky. But then there will be another thing like this eventually, maybe a few years from now, another decades from now, and then we will have to do that again. And so that's another thing that the WHO said. They said that the Congo is actually, the work they did to stop the Ebola in the Congo has meant that the Congo actually is quite well equipped for COVID-19. It's not, as you would think, the worst case, the worst in the entire continent. They have these labs they set up for the Ebola virus, which they can now equip to detect COVID-19. And they just sent them lots of test kits, but they've already got the technicians and the experts there sufficient to do some detecting on the spot right away. if we rush in and do this preparedness for Africa for COVID-19, then the best thing of all would be if we just sort of employ people for a year on this, but we make it a permanent thing. So having built the facilities there and trained people up in order to deal with COVID-19, then the ideal thing would be, invested some $1 million in training up some people, and then to retain them for thousands of dollars a year, whatever it is, to retain them after you've done all that investment into it. So that would be, if we were sensible, that would be the most sensible thing to do. So get this 675 million, do that right away, and then work towards having some kind of a constant fund, which, as with the CRF, it could start off with being a few tens of millions a year for resilience in Africa to epidemics, and then gradually build on that as we find it's needed. Anyway, I've talked quite a lot now. What else do I want to talk about? I see this is going to be one of my long ones. So I think I'll just talk a little bit more, but you can always switch off if you've seen enough. So I just want to talk a little bit more about some other things. So just about, you look at daily deaths, and there's such a lot of them, about 100. But if you look at this with the mathematical mind, and I'm saying a little bit about epidemiology, not an epidemiologist, just understanding it, then if it was an epidemic, we're going like that. You can see that also here. Well, I think this is the actual cases here. So if I bring up this graph, then if this was like if it was spreading and it wasn't contained, it'd be going up like that. It'd be doubling every so often. Instead it's going like that, it's leveling off. This glitch is because of changing statistic methods. And it's the same if you remove those. Then, well, that is looking a little bit more like. But what's hiding that, it's still not doubling. If it was doubling, it would be like that. This is constant cases from China, but then these super spreading events, which are certainly quite concerning. But as long as there's little clusters, even if it's 1,000, even if you get 1,000 in South Korea, then this is still being contained. So that was just a little thing about that. Where was I going? I'm in private mode, so as to not show notifications and people's names and stuff like that. So that's the daily deaths. And so this is the growth factor. As you can see, it's below 1 a lot of the time. And this suggests it's definitely being contained. And if you look at the percentage of the change in the total, it keeps going down. So if this was, there was 47% change, increase in deaths. There was a 64% increase in deaths from January 23rd to January 24th. And then 25% every day, around a quarter increase. So during January, then the number of deaths was increasing by about a quarter every single day. And you can see that it doubled in 2 days then. It doubled in 1, 2, 3 days then. And then it doubled in, what's doubled? That's 340. 1, 2, 3. 3 days. It was doubling every 3 days then. But then after that, 1, 2, 3. That's nothing like a doubling. So that's about, you can see, it was doubling every 3 days. 80, 170, January 29. It's still doubling every 3 days. But it's really beginning of February that it stopped doubling the deaths. But now that is actually, there's a bit of a delay there. The big containment efforts happened back here, January 23 indeed. But these were people who were infected before they had done these huge measures of stopping the planes and telling everyone to stay outdoors and all that stuff. That happened around then. And then there's this delay up here. And so you have to bear in mind this delay thing with everything. And then I will show here as well. This a lot of people are posting the difference between the cases recovered and the cases who are dying, and the ratio of recovered to the dying. So I just wanted to explain a little bit about that. So we look there, 22,000 recovering, 2,000 deaths. So we've got about 10 times as many recovered as have died, nearly 10 times as many. So that doesn't mean that 1 in 10 dies, because these deaths come from cases that were confirmed way, way back in the history. You go back to these deaths now count a lot of them from cases that were back then, even further back. So they can be in hospital for a month or more in critical care before they die. So some of the deaths are coming from back then. So what you see, in fact, if you point to the recoveries and post them against the ones that die, then the recoveries keep going up as a percentage, and deaths keep going down. It's now 9%. It'll keep going down to 2% and probably 1% or so. Certainly 2%. That seems to be what they see from the cases so far in the big studies. So when you see this big ratio of recoveries to deaths, then that's what it means. This is going to keep going up. We've got 76,000 confirmed, and so about 2, 3, 4 weeks from now, but if you want to go through all the critical cases, like a month from now, then you can expect 70-something thousand recoveries to be there, and then the deaths go up at several more thousand. And then confirmed, if it's an epidemic, if it's a pandemic, it could go up to 500,000 or something if it was starting spreading in Africa. So, but you still would have, and then but you still have to bear in mind that the percentage that's dying is much, much lower than the ratio of that to that. These are the deaths keep on going for a long time. The recoveries are from a long time back. And the deaths are from even further back. But part of it is that these recoveries, I've said it all, I don't need to say any more, going on and on. I'm not going to add any more clarity, I don't think. So I think I've done everything now, and let's see if there's anything I've missed. So yeah, just that's my main message in this. If any of you have any influence at all, then try and see if you can do something about this. I mean, the economic impact is already, as I said, there's this, another estimate is that the COVID-19 may have cost China $185 billion already. And yet, nobody, and that of course has knock-on effects on the rest of the world. And yet, we can't find, and then they can't find a fraction of $1 billion. We can't even find $60 million. And the WHO themselves said they were very, very surprised at the lack of response to their request. They don't understand why nobody is stumping up with the money, because for them it's just so clear that this is such an important thing to do. So that's where I would like to end. Just to keep that in your mind, and try, if you've got any influence, just try saying, share this post, share this video as well. Just try and get some awareness. I'm off the screen. Try and get some awareness amongst everyone else that this is important. We need to, the WHO know what they're talking about, and that's what they're saying, that we really, really need to strengthen this response. We need to do something. We can't just be complacent and say, okay, China's pretty much containing it, we're not doing too badly, South Korea will probably succeed, Japan will probably succeed with the Diamond Princess, with a bit of luck Iran's going to succeed. But if this keeps going, then there's going to be another one, then another, and another, and then eventually, then we can get something that could be much harder to deal with than the situations we've got already. and that's what we have to stop. And then but if we don't do that, then later on this year, then we will be in this situation where it will become a pandemic, and that then you will be having people around the world. There'll be more places that you have to be careful not to go to, or you'll take a lot of care if you go there. More situations where you have to be careful. But at the moment, in the rest of the world, outside China, your risk, and even in China, your personal risk is absolutely minute. As I said, even in Wuhan, 4 cases per 100,000 is the number that die. That's the equivalent to the number that die every 2 days in Hubei province. So the total that have died of this since it began everywhere is about the same as die in Hubei province every 2 days of all causes. So please do put that in perspective. If it does become a pandemic, then we are talking about a level of deaths that you would have anyway in 2 days. That's a very rough idea. If it was all like Wuhan province, suppose that the whole world became like Wuhan province, a very worst case scenario. I would say a pretty bad scenario. And we're also staying at home, and people worried about whether they're dying of it. Then in that case, the deaths worldwide, if it was just the same as percentage as the Wuhan, then the number who would die of it would be the same as die of natural causes every 2 days. So it's significant. You don't want to add 2 days' worth of deaths to the 365 days' worth of deaths we have every year. It's very significant. We don't want to do that. But please do keep it a little bit in perspective, and it's you get so much internet rumours and nonsense, and people saying it's going to be the collapse of civilization, the end of the economy, that we're all going to die, that end of humanity. Some of them probably saying, I don't know if anybody's saying that yet. I wouldn't be surprised if they did. It's absolute nuts. No, that's not what's happening. But it's still very, very important that we do something to stop this spreading, and we can do it. We've got this narrowing window of opportunity, and so WHO say that with every single talk. Now we have this window of opportunity, and so we have that now. And as I said, so just repeat that message once more time. If you try and get more awareness of this, that if we can just fund this, even 10%, $60 million of this fund, and make a huge difference. So, right, just remind you, all of you, that this is the Doomsday Debunk group on Facebook, and you can go there if you're scared of things like this, and you can also go there if you want to help people who are scared. That includes that's just the cover of a book I did some while back on that. All the proceeds go to suicide prevention charities. It's quite an old. It needs updating. I haven't done anything on it for a while. But anyway, it's a cover for the group. And anyway, if you join the group, do read the rules at the head of the group, and that will that helps to make everything run smoothly.